Hello, everybody. It's live at the waterhole time again, and I am your host for today, Ben Coley. And I would very much love to hear from you. Remember, this is a live and interactive situation, so we'd love to hear from you. Send in questions and comments about anything we're seeing or anything you want to know about African wildlife. And as always, I'll do my absolute best to tell you what I know. Whatever I don't know, I will try and find out more about. But this is a very special start to today's show. We are at Onguma, just next to Etosha National Park. This is a new camera feed. For those of you who are regular viewers, you may not recognize this one. We've only started broadcasting from here over the last few days. And this is the first time we have seen some elephants in this location. Yesterday we had a few impala, a few springbok, a few wildebeest. We watched a heron hunting, but now we have some elephants enjoying this little oasis in the middle of a very, very dry area around Etosha, particularly this time of year. And these elephants have obviously found a nice little bit of greenery, and with that little patch of grass, little patch of reeds. And so for me, this is one of the prettiest waterholes that we show you here. I just love the fact it really does look like an oasis in the desert. And why would you not want to hang out here if you were an elephant? It's a very good question. But we are very, very fortunate to have all of these different locations. If you are joining us for the first time, you will see that we will bounce around from Etosha to Kruger and the surrounding greater Kruger reserves. We've got camera feed in Kenya, even down on the coast, and our experienced team of zoomies who are controlling the cameras will be keeping an eye out for anything interesting. And we will visit different locations and discuss whatever we are seeing. So this is a very, very special start to the day, certainly. And I hope you're all having a fabulous day, whatever it is you're doing and whatever time it is for you. It's 12:30 out here in Africa at the moment, or certainly in South Africa, I should say, and in Namibia for that matter. A lot further west where I am situated at the moment in Hoedspruit, close to the boundary of the Kruger National Park, with no difference in time zones between South Africa and Namibia, which does mean it stays light in Namibia late, despite not having any daylight savings in the summer. It doesn't really get dark till 9:30, 10 o'clock, whilst it will be dark in South Africa a lot earlier by sort of 7:30, even in the height of summer. It's lovely to see some elephants for the first time on this new camera. Elephants really have been the mainstay over the last few weeks as South Africa is gripped by winter, which is our dry season. So animals under a lot of water stress. You can imagine if you're an elephant requiring potentially hundreds of kilograms of food on a daily basis, there's not much to be found out there. And when you also need a good 100 liters or so of water, these water holes become hugely important for these animals, particularly out in these areas. These more desert elephants will have to move over huge distances and rely on their excellent memories, very large brains and parts of the brain, the cortex, the frontal lobes, all very, very well developed in elephants to give them those famous long memories. Hugely important when you have to travel far and wide to find the necessary resources for you and your family. But it looks like we've got a group of bulls here. We've been seeing a lot of that of late, particularly up at Oldonia in Kenya. We're seeing a huge influx of bulls to these areas. Where all the breeding herds are, I'm not sure. Yesterday at Okakuyu, another one of our waterholes in Etosha National Park, we saw a massive herd of elephants come down with youngsters and all, probably 50 or 60 of them, that all decided to get into the water and have a good splash around. That was wonderful to see. But this is quite normal also to see groups of old males hanging out together, these little bachelor groups, for a little bit of company. Often some older ones with some younger ones in tow that will have recently left their breeding herds and they are hanging out with the older boys, learning the skill set required to be a successful adult elephant. Okay, Russ, yeah, elephants are always a great start. I can, I never want to guarantee anything out in the bush, but if I was going to guarantee sightings, it's normally elephants around this time of day, hot conditions, and the elephants come down and make use of these water holes. Quite sure what this youngster's doing in the centre there. Seems to have just completely stopped. I don't know what he was doing. Spencer, you're asking if desert dwelling animals have any different adaptations or glands to regulate weather conditions. Um, well, not so much glands, but certainly adaptations, although we do see them in a variety of animals that inhabit different habitats, but you could perhaps say they're slightly more advanced in desert conditions. The main things to deal with out there is food and water availability and thermoregulation. Um, so we were discussing it yesterday with regard to the Gemsbok or the oryx. They have probably the most efficient digestive system of all the desert dwelling antelopes there, where their food will stay in their body for a huge amount of time, potentially up to 3 days before it's fully processed. And that digestive system is exceptionally efficient at extracting every possible last little morsel of nutrition and moisture. So the dung that comes out is very, very dry and powdery, hugely well processed, just to mean there isn't this sort of constant search for food. And they, along with many other desert adapted animals, have the ability to increase their own body temperatures uh, in excess of that of the ambient temperature. And that's a brilliant way of reducing sweating, which then reduces water loss and the need to replenish it. You do get some really interesting adaptations, particularly amongst the smaller things, the toki beetles and various other insects and arthropods that live in these incredibly dry areas have some amazing little adaptations. Some of them, when you mention glands, actually, you could argue this is a gland, but well, it is a gland, but some insects can produce a sort of a waxy cuticle, a waxy coating, sometimes white in color to help reflect heat and, more importantly, limit water loss. And then you get certain species of beetle that will actually make use of the fog, particularly as you go further west towards the coast in Namibia. We do get fog rolling in off the coastline, and that's a hugely important source of moisture. And you'll get beetles that will sort of stand exactly doing a headstand, but with their heads low and their abdomens raised up into the air, into the prevailing wind that's carrying those water droplets. And they will that fog will condense on the exoskeleton of the beetle, and a lot of them have specific sort of ridges and bumps which are designed to capture those water droplets. And then they drip down because of the way the beetle is facing with its head down towards the ground. Those water droplets will flow down little grooves and channels towards the beetle's mouth and allow it to hydrate. And then you get another type. I forget exactly what they're called. It's like a flying saucer, as its nickname. It's a very sort of rounded, flattened beetle. And during these fog periods, they dig sort of little trenches perpendicular to where the wind is coming. And again, the water then condenses or collects on the ridges of these trenches, and the beetle moves up and down and collects that water to stay hydrated. So even the little things have to deal with those difficult climatic conditions, and there are some fascinating adaptations in order to do so. Should probably mention the springbok as well, since we can see the springbok there on the left, two little antelopes, similar to gazelles, and in fact their scientific name Antidorcus marsupialis. Antidorcus means similar to a gazelle, but not actually a gazelle. But the marsupialis Sounds a little bit like marsupial, which would make you think of kangaroos and wallabies that have that pouch. And whilst springboks don't have a pouch within which their young develop, although that would be pretty fascinating if they did, um, on their rumps, sort of above their tail, they have a flap of skin that they can open and close. Um, and particularly if they are pronking, doing that thing where they bounce up and down, uh, that flap of skin will open, revealing a very sort of white patch. And that does give off particular smell or a scent, so there is a gland involved with it. Although it doesn't help with thermoregulation, that's more of a distraction for predators and potentially to keep together under signs of stress. If they're being chased by something, they'll expose that gland and secrete all those smells into the environment, which say may either confuse a predator with all those new stimuli, but also aids the springboks to stay together following their own scent, a bit like ants do, I suppose, putting out their own unique scent trails. But it is thought that on very, very hot days, the springboks will often stand with their rumps facing towards the sun, exposing that white. And again, white helps to reflect heat. So lots and lots of adaptations of desert animals. I'm sure we'll think of more as we go, but there's a few to keep us going for now. But very, very pretty to see these big elephant bulls here at Onguma. Very special. Um, we mentioned Oldonyo up in Kenya earlier, so let's head up there. I think we've got some zebras having a drink. We have many zebras having a drink. It's usually the source of much commotion, a great big dazzle zebra. I'm sure we will see lots of pushing and shoving and biting and scratching and kicking and bad language that won't necessarily translate. Always fun to watch these big groups of zebras um, interact with each other. Lovely again to hear those vocalizations of the zebras. We've seen a few flailing hooves already. It looks like we've got an eland who's braving the melee of stripes. Just chaos when all these zebras get together. But it is an amazing thing to witness all of those stripes. It's just one of the most unique animals on the planet. Yes, it looks like a horse. Yes, it's related to a horse. But I can't really think of anything else that has such an amazing pattern. Of course, we've got lots of things with patches like leopards and giraffes and leopard tortoises, which all share the Latin species name or a derivative of pardus, referring to that patterning. But there is really something amazing about the zebra. How nature came up with this one is a bit of a mystery. That's an interesting question. Do we know or do we understand? I suppose you were asking about sort of the pain threshold of a prey animal like a zebra or an impala when they are grabbed by a predator. Obviously, we are very emotive and empathetic beings. So, it is a concern for a lot of us. I think we don't really fully understand it because we really have to ask the zebra or the impala what it is they're feeling. Regrettably, I have no doubt that they do feel pain. They have nerve endings, and disruption to those nerve endings or stimuli to those nerve endings will certainly be transferred to the brain. Remember that pain is it's information. It's telling me that there is a problem. There are very, very unique cases amongst humans. I forget the official name of it, where people can feel no pain. I mean, it's not just a heightened pain threshold. It is literally just, I mean, you could stab a knife through your leg, which is fully functional, and not feel it at all. It's very, very rare, but it has been reported in humans. So I have no doubt that unfortunately those animals feel pain. Whether they think of it the same way we do, I don't really know. But it's important for an animal to understand that it has been injured. I know one of the animals that has been very much persecuted because it was considered a cruel animal is the wild dog, with its way of just sort of running prey into the ground and eating it alive, doesn't bother to choke it out like a lion or a leopard does. The prey animal generally just gives up and is eaten, and it is seen as a very, very cruel hunting technique, and the wild dogs have received a lot of persecution because of that interpretation. But various studies have been done that with the adrenaline and the shock and everything else, that we do think that that discomfort is somewhat muted. But I don't really know. Certainly, there's been stuff I remember with sort of goldfish that has been investigated as to whether fish feel pain. A lot of the time, it was thought that perhaps they didn't, but they've done various experiments which have been documented whereby fish have been given a negative stimuli and learned very quickly to avoid that stimulus, to suggest, therefore, that they do recognize it as an unpleasant situation. So I think it's fair to say that all animals, to some extent, do feel pain, but there's not, unfortunately, a great deal they can do about it. It's horrible. Some of the worst things I've seen out on safari over the years are things like impalas with broken legs, and they're going around their daily life with a leg just flopping around because it's been broken. But you don't see any sort of facial expressions or anything like that to suggest the level of discomfort. So it's a good question, and one that I think we probably choose not to think about too much because we find the whole topic a little bit unsavory. But it's a good question, Thea. I'm sure there are papers that have been done on it, but those are my sort of initial thoughts. It's quite an interesting topic. You've got my brain whirring. I think tomorrow I may get back to you. I'm sure I'll do a little bit of reading this afternoon on any sort of experiments and documentation on animals' interpretation of pain. Well, from Brighton, not too far from my neck of the woods, assuming that is Brighton in the UK. You're referring to the elands that we can see here. You see one drinking on the left, saying you normally consider them as a desert animal, but saw them in Amacala down in KwaZulu-Natal. I don't know the history of the Iland that well in that area. It's generally considered certainly a drier, more arid specialist. But a lot of antelope have been introduced to certain areas. You'll find if they're not brilliantly adapted, they won't do particularly well, but certainly down in those areas, there's plenty of food. So, whilst they may be very well adapted to desert conditions, as long as they've got access to food and water, there's no reason that they won't do well in certain areas. I don't honestly know, or I wouldn't have thought that eland were naturally occurring in KwaZulu-Natal. They were probably introduced, but again, I very much stand to be corrected. But magnificent animals, huge things. Big eland bull weighing as much as a big buffalo bull, believe it or not, nearly up to a ton in weight. I think just going back to your question there, Phil, I wouldn't consider eland a desert animal. That would be for me something more like a Gemsbok or the oryx. They're very much associated with desert conditions, but dry and arid, yes. We get very few of them down in the southern parts of the Kruger, but if you go up into the north, when it does get drier and hotter, then you have a better chance of seeing eland. It's not something seen very often. I've only seen them a few times, certainly, but I've also seen them up in the mountain areas in that more open grasslands. So yeah, I'm not sure whether in what situation they've been introduced, or whether they've just sort of found themselves there. But in my experience, more suited to arid areas as opposed to desert conditions. Valerie asking, I've used the term low felt a few times, just wanted to know a little bit more information about that. Well, we divide South Africa pretty much into two very, very broad types of vegetation, the low felt and the high felt, and as the name suggests, a lot of it to do is to do with elevation. So the high felt, which is the area around sort of Johannesburg and that surrounding area, is at altitude. It's much higher above sea level. And then we have the Great Escarpment, which sort of runs along the east coast of South Africa. And when you come off that escarpment, off that higher elevation, and get much lower down towards sea level, that's the area we would categorize as the low felt. Felt meaning sort of grass, for want of a better word. So the Kruger is considered low felt because it is much closer to sea level. And the big difference is the sort of the type of vegetation that you get growing there. So different grasses, different trees, and different strategies to deal with those situations. So we have what is called sweet felt and sour felt as well, which is referring to the grass. So we have sweet felt down in the low felt where the grass is generally a little bit more palatable because it's moister conditions as well, close to the Indian Ocean, a little bit more humid. Up in the high felt, it's more sour felt where the grass, as a rule, is not quite so nutritionally um, advanced, but doesn't have as much nutrition in it. It also recovers a lot more quickly in the low felt than it does in the high felt. But generally speaking, it's to do the low felt is to do with the height above sea level and the associated more humidity in the eastern side of the country due to the warmer Indian Ocean. Leo, yes, I would think all the vocalization is because of the different harems, as you said. So this is a big group of zebra here. We've probably got close to 100 zebra milling around this area. This is not one big herd. There will be multiple harems, so one male with a group of four, five, six, seven, eight females over whom that dominant stallion is dominant. So yeah, the vocalization will just be interactions between them. Now, there's not, to my knowledge, not a huge amount of research being done on the different types of vocalizations. If you look into elephants, for example, and monkeys, we've got a much better understanding of the different vocalizations that they make. So yeah, I think those will just be little disputes and communications between the different harems, potentially also between the members of an individual harem, maybe just trying to stay together amongst all the chaos here. Warnings to other members, other stallions to stay away from his mares. Generally speaking, we associate that noise as an alarm call, a warning call from zebras, but I have no doubt that there are other uses to those vocalizations. Remember, our ears are fairly primitive, where we hear one sound that sounds the same to an animal that's ears are specifically designed to pick up those frequencies. There will be subtle variations that will transmit different messages. Very obvious example of that will be with birds. There are many birds that we perceive as just giving off one note in their call or a specific sequence of notes that we hear. But actually, if you look at a sonogram of a breakdown of those notes being produced, there are multiple different notes that are perhaps so quick that our ears cannot pick up those differences, things that we are just not privy to. So I've no doubt there is a more complex language amongst zebras that we are aware of. But it is one of my favourite noises out in the bush, certainly. So really lovely to see big groups of zebras like this here in the Lowveld, just because of the lack of massive sort of open grassy areas. We're much more dominated by shrubby areas with larger trees and bushes as opposed to sort of the great open plains of East Africa, and we do find more in the Highveld as well. Um, So we don't generally get massive aggregations of the same species here. We have a greater species diversity because of the diversity of vegetation, but we generally don't get massive herds of things, with the exception perhaps of buffalo would be a good example. You do get hundreds, maybe even thousands strong heads of buffalo out here. But often when we see zebra, we just see those little individual harems, little groups of four, five, sixes together. Very rare that you see big groups such as this. The only time I've ever seen a huge herd of zebra was when I was working in Katavi National Park in Tanzania about a decade ago now. Um, and yeah, I remember driving around the corner and driving into a herd of, we estimated about 800 zebras that just scattered everywhere, sort of made you go cross-eyed. But it was a really magnificent thing to see. I'm yet to get up to see the Great Migration, which is a travesty, but something I'd like to change in the future, just to see those massive numbers. But again, different habitats have changed that, as well as human interference and putting fences everywhere, stopping natural migration routes, has caused a much more fragmented population density, or lack thereof. Also got me intrigued with this Eland question about Eland and KZN. I'm going to try and do a little bit of research on that, because it's not an animal that I've spent very much time around. I don't think I've ever seen, well, I know that I've never seen one in the Sabi Sands or in the Greater Kruger area. The only places I've seen Eland is in the north of the park towards Bunda Maria and Pafuri, in those areas. Um, but having seen them up on the sort of cooler escarpments there, I'm slightly more intrigued as to what their historical distribution is. So I'm going to have a look into that and get back to you either later during this session or possibly tomorrow. But this is all good. This is why we love your questions coming in. I certainly do not claim, and I'm sure my fellow naturalists would say the same, that we do not know everything at all. And it is more difficult to answer these questions about animals that we don't see regularly in our areas of operation. And this is all a good thing. Every day is a school day. Learning is important. So I'll see what I can find out and come back to you on that one, as well as the pain question. So please do keep the questions coming in. I love it. And yeah, gives me stuff to think about and muse over. Well, Drew, that's a good question and one that I'm probably not really qualified to answer. You guys are giving me some good questions today. Thank you. But asking when zoos take in animals that have specific habitat requirements, how do they make conditions favorable for them? Um, well, the good news is that as the world ticks over, we're learning more and more. There's a big push towards conservation and understanding and studying these animals, particularly with regard to the ethics and an animal's requirements, be it from an enrichment perspective or from the specific habitat requirements and food resources that that animal needs. So there will be a huge amount of research, I hope, or I'd like to think that the more established zoos will do, speaking to experts, to conservationists and ecologists and researchers as to what the specific requirements are for certain animals and trying to ensure that any enclosure into which they are put are adapted best they possibly can to their needs. But it is always weird to see. I mean, if you go to England, for example, you go to some of the zoos there and you see lions, they've all got very shaggy, or a lot of them have got quite shaggy hair, which will be a physiological reaction to the slightly cooler weather. Um, but yeah, I don't know the ins and outs of it and the specifics, but there will be a huge pool of people and departments whose job it is to ensure, hopefully, that those requirements are being met, and plenty of research that will be done to ensure that it is for the benefit of the animal and for the species. Yeah, a lot of people have got conflicting opinions on zoos, certainly. I'm certainly not a big fan of seeing animals in a cage of any sort, having spent so much time watching animals in their natural habitats. But that being said, I have been to various zoos, and yeah, I'm very upset if I see something that I don't consider to be um, a good enough area for that animal. But there is a lot to be said in terms of conservation and particularly raising awareness of these animals. And so the biggest positive thing I can think of from of zoos, perhaps, is say raising that awareness. I like to think that maybe if just one in every 50 person or people who go to a zoo and sees this animal in a captive environment and thinks, wow, I wish I'd like to see this animal in its actual native environment, will then come on a trip and see them in a situation like this, then it's all to do with raising awareness of conservation and the beauty of nature. So I suppose in that regard, it's a good thing, and it gives people the opportunity to see animals that they may never get to see themselves. I remember going to London Zoo many, many years ago and spending probably 20 minutes watching a giant anteater just wander around its enclosure. I've never seen a giant anteater, a South American animal, but it's one of the things I'd really like to see. And it's high on the list because I saw it in a zoo. And one day I hope to have a chance to get to South America and see that animal and many others that I probably never even thought about. But it was a visit to the zoo that's elevated my desire to want to go and see that animal and learn more about it. And thankfully today, particularly with social media and far more of a green movement, as I like to call it, those zoos that are not up to standard will be being closed down relatively quickly, or certainly should be. Ciao. It's very sort of difficult and but topical conversations. These yesterday we had a very brief chat about trophy hunting, zoos. These are all very, very volatile subjects. Lovely shots to see the real difference in size between a zebra and giraffe. The zebras can easily walk in between the legs of that giraffe, no problems whatsoever. Puts the size into perspective a little bit. So talking about adaptations, I don't think there's an animal in the world that has more specific adaptations than a giraffe does to deal with that very, very unusual but unique body shape that it's got. An incredibly heavy heart, not that much bigger in terms of the size one would expect from an animal of that size, but it has a very, very heavy heart because muscle weighs a lot. And the left ventricle, the ventricle of the heart, which is responsible for pumping that blood up the neck, is massive. If I remember right, it's about 7 centimeters thick, the wall of that ventricle, and it has to be very muscular in order to push the blood against gravity up the neck to the a unique sort of way that their lungs are positioned as well, and when they run, the lungs sort of act like a bellows to get more oxygen into the body, and of course, very well known for having that special network of blood vessels at the base of the brain, so that when a giraffe engages in an activity such as this and puts its head down low, that all the blood doesn't flow into the brain, and more importantly, when it stands up very quickly because of that nuchal ligament sort of snapping it back like that, all the blood doesn't suddenly rush out of the brain and cause the poor giraffe to pass out. Very interesting adaptations, just a few there that are possessed by the giraffe to deal with its unusual physiology. So its legs as well, very, very tight fitting skin and sort of elasticated vessels to just deal with the blood pooling in the legs. And so there are, I wouldn't like to say it's definitely fact, but heard various stories that G suits worn by fighter pilots that sort of clamp around the legs to stop all the blood rushing into the legs and developing thrombosis and other problems were developed after looking at the way a giraffe's skin around its legs are put together as well. So, yet another example of us learning from the adaptations of nature. Robert, 4217. Yeah, giraffes do lie down. They can't lie on their side completely sort of flat out. It's a problem with their digestive system. If they did, the food that's being stored in the rumen, that first of their four chambered stomachs, that would actually flood out into the lungs. So they can't lie down on their side, but they can sort of tuck their legs underneath them and lie down in that regard. Um, but they don't really need to sleep like we do, requiring multiple hours of sleep. They might get, 10, 15, 20 minutes a couple of times a day. And when they do engage in that deeper sleep, then they will actually sort of turn their necks completely round. And I always say it's a bit like a duck. They sort of rest their chins on their spine. So completely turning that neck around. But it's not for long periods of time. They can't really afford to. But it's not unusual to see a giraffe lying down at night time, even with their head up. They just ruminate, and that's almost like meditation. Lots of studies been done to show that the brain waves actually do change on an animal whilst they're meditating, and it's almost like a sleep state, like a relaxation state to conserve energy. And elephants the same. Yes, they do lie down. I've even seen herds of elephants lying down. It's very, very strange when you do see it. Um, and again, it doesn't happen all that often for them just to lie flat in the grass, but I have seen it a few times. Sometimes you'll see a bull having a rest. They'll often lie on a slope like a termite mound just to facilitate having to drag that huge bulk back up to a standing position. But young elephants lie down quite regularly. Obviously, it's tiring, a lot of weight to carry around, and their muscles haven't yet fully developed. So, yeah, they do lie down, but just not with massive regularity. Mikey, no, well, actually, that's not true. I have, so have I considered writing a book about my experiences and my journey that led me from England to Africa and all the experiences that I've had. Um, I've never really committed to the idea. I had a blog for a little while and I've done a couple of sort of those photo ebook things that you can design for yourself, which I have given to my nephews and things, more on a sort of a personal basis. Um, my parents are constantly suggesting that I should write a book about my experiences, but I suppose, like everybody, we're a little bit shy to want to sort of put ourselves out there. But I do feel very honoured for the life that I've had over the last 20 years and the experiences and the things that I've seen and the emotions that spending time in the African bush has given me, be it from watching animals, but also the human element of it. I think it's one thing that is often forgotten from a guiding perspective, is that yes, it's about knowledge of the environment and knowledge of the animals from the big and to the small, but ultimately as a guide, we are our role is that of an entertainer, it's that of a storyteller, of an educator. And it is very, very nice to know that, or hope that I have influenced people and shown them some incredible things and potentially life-changing experiences that has caused them to have new interests and a new outlook on things. I think that's really important, particularly with my time doing training. I spent 5 years training other guides, and those are some of the best moments. To be honest, when you have students who really sort of embrace the ethos that you are trying to get across to them, and when they do their assessment drives, or you see them maturing and developing throughout the course that they are a part of. I remember one assessment drive in particular with a it was an Afrikaans young boy. I think he was only 19. Um, and when he first arrived, didn't really stand out from the crowd, but I did his sort of entry level guiding qualifications, the NQF2 for Gaza level one, as it was back in those days. And he absolutely blew me away. I was flabbergasted at just how he got it. He had the it factor, the X factor, whatever you want to call it. Um, but I'm not ashamed to say that he actually had me in tears. I was welling up at the end of it because I was so proud of him, and so happy to see the way that he had sort of embraced the whole experience and was able to translate that to us as guests on that assessment drive. That was really, really special. And it's very nice for me to know that there are still many guides that are operating today that I have been a part of their training, and yeah, that makes me feel very happy and proud. So watch this space, Mikey. Maybe one day when I'm a bit older and I get a little bit more reminiscent, maybe I'll put my thoughts and experiences down in a book. Who knows? I've had an idea for a while to do a book, but particularly on constellation mythology. Those of you who have listened to me harp on before know my love of the stars and particularly the cultural stories behind them. And it's one of the things that's so difficult to find information on, or sort of unravel this history of the constellations and the different stories from different cultures behind them. And there's lots of stories about the science of it all, but very few books or resources where you can find all of the cultural side of the constellations, from Bushman, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Mayan, Native American, Aborigine, Maori cultures. There are so many beautiful stories about the stars, but trying to pick through all the information online these days is a very time consuming and difficult thing to do. There are very few resources that have all of those in one place. So if I'm going to write a book anytime in the next few years, it would probably be on that topic. But yeah, we'll have to see. It's a huge undertaking. and requires a lot of commitment and will take a lot of time. But that is something I have considered. Zebra crossing, a very apt name for what we're witnessing at the moment. Yes, stargazing is better in certain locations. You've mentioned desert compared to the low felt. Look, it's great over here. If you go to more remote areas, if you get sort of further east into the Kruger Park, certainly. But one of the problems that we do have here, as I mentioned earlier, in the low felt is the higher humidity. Oh, apparently we're going to quickly head over to Jabalani. We'll carry on our stargazing chat in a minute. Oh, how amazing is that? We've got a leopard. So just outside Hoodspray, so this leopard is probably only within about 30 kilometers, if not less, sitting at the moment. Absolutely spectacular. Well, this is a first for me. This is my first leopard on live at the waterhole. So I am very, very chuffed. What an animal. Possibly my favorite. I try not to be a sheep. It's his favorite or many people's favorite, but having worked in areas like the Sabi for quite a few years, I've been fortunate to see more leopards than most. And if it ever gets old, looking for one, hoping to see one, spending time with one, they're just mesmerically beautiful. Oh no! Oh, it's back. Good. Sorry, my went black for a moment. Breathing quite heavily, considering it's not a hot day in Hoodspray today. It's actually partially looks quite hungry this level. Not a full belly. Often you're a bit heavy panting with a full-bellied animal. Just get oxygen into the stomach or carbon dioxide into the stomach to help with digestion. That is glorious. What a beautiful opportunity to see it so up close as well. Just look at those markings, those rosettes on the body. Brilliant camouflage. Ideal for dappled light conditions. Of course, leopards generally preferring thicker vegetation. And you get lots of light and shadows of all that light coming through the little gaps in the leaves, and that camouflage is utterly perfect. A leopard can quite literally disappear. It's happened so many times. You're following a leopard through the bush and you glance away for a split second and you look around and it's gone. Just the ultimate master of clandestine disguise. This is very special. think most of my memories. Mikey, you were asking about a book. I think a lot of my experiences in a book that I may or may not write one day will involve experiences with leopards. Um, so, been very, very fortunate to have seen quite a few, but particularly in the Sabi Sands and those surrounding areas where there has been a lot of tourism and very well regulated ethics that have been um, shown by the guides and those reserves. Those animals have become incredibly habituated to vehicles, and we have such an opportunity to see them up close and personal. Um, I mean, I have had leopard cubs, probably only around about 3 months old, came out of the bushes following Mum. Mum walked in front of our Land Rover, right along the front of the bumper, and these three little bundles of spotty fluff emerged from the grass. So it came right up to the side of the car, stopped, looked up at me and my guests, and then proceeded to follow Mum just by. They didn't bother going around the car. They just walked straight underneath the Land Rover and came out the other side and carried on in a straight line. They haven't developed that fear of vehicles. Too young to have done so, and obviously they take their lead from Mum. Mum showed no concern about the proximity of the vehicle. So why would the cubs have any other thought process? So I've had leopard cubs walk underneath my car, come out the other side, and also a young male. I remember when I was at Sabi Sabi was with his mum, and we were parked parallel to the road, so across the road, watching the mother and the sub-adult move away up the road. And then it was actually fascinating to watch. Mum turned around and just looked at the sub-adults. Evidently, a message was passed between them, which was basically, stay where you are. I'm off. I'm going to go look for food. I'm not going to have you ruin my hunt. You stay here and I'll come back and get you later when dinner is ready. So he turned round and wandered back from whence he'd came, again walked straight towards us, came right up to the side of the vehicle, and then, for want of a better word, leopard crawled under the vehicle and came out the other side and carried on walking down the road. He went back to the termite mound where we had originally found the two of them, excuse me, lay down on there. We stayed with him for a good hour, maybe a little bit longer. And it was fascinating. He got up and he went for this big wander. We followed him for, must have been a kilometer or two as he meandered his way through the trees and through the bushes, investigating things. I had no real idea where we were because we were off the road trying to pick a path to follow him. And then, say, about 45 minutes later or whatever it was, we ended up back on the same termite mound and he climbed back up it, lay down, and just waited. So he obviously knew that's where he was supposed to wait. And if he wanted food, he had to stay there because that's where Mum's going to come back and look for him. But amazing to spend or have the opportunity to sort of really get into the lives of some of these animals and try and understand them. Joanne Mello, this is your first predator at a waterhole. Well, I'm very, very happy for you. It's only the second time I've seen either a lion or a leopard on live at the waterhole. We had a couple of lions, a very, very brief view of some disappearing into the bushes a month or so ago. But yeah, this is a first leopard for me as well on live at the waterhole. Amazing stuff. Zebra crossing, you back again. I'll come back to your stargazing question, but you're asking whether there is a more favorable season for leopards and I assume other predators to raise their cubs. As you rightly said, they don't have a specific breeding season at any time throughout the year. But generally speaking, predators do very well during the winter months because it's all about resource availability, and they are generally going to be eating herbivores. And during the winter months, the herbivores do not have much access to food. They're not in such good condition. They are more exposed. There's less places for them to hide. They're under water stress. So they're more like they have to come out of hiding and come down to water holes and expose themselves. So you generally find that predators during the winter months, because of the availability of food and the slightly easier um, easier way to catch them. That does, but I hope you know what I mean. The food is just a bit easier to catch. That being said, towards the end of the winter, you've now got a lot of herbivores that are pregnant because they will be coinciding their births with the summer rains. Um, and it does often happen that a pregnant female is perhaps unable to move as well as a non-pregnant female or a male, so they do sometimes get taken. And then, of course, during the summer months, there is just an influx of baby antelope species and baby herbivores that can be caught. So it's difficult to put my finger on it and say there's a specific time. What we do know is that in times of drought or times of particular hardship for herbivores, that predator numbers do very, very well. If you look at population dynamics, whenever there's a drop off in herbivores because of a lack of resources, you'll find that the predators do very, very well because they're taking advantage of those conditions. Divan Hatting, you're asking about how do we determine the age and sex of a leopard? Well, I've purposely not given any specifics yet because I'm waiting for a little bit more information. There's no dimorphism in terms of the coloration between a male and a female, but a male is noticeably larger than a female, assuming we're talking about full-grown, mature adults. So a big male leopard would be in the region of 70 to 80 kilograms, whereas a big female leopard is from 30 to 40 kilograms. So there's a huge difference in terms of stature and musculature and general size between the two. Much easier to see if they're side by side. Um, Males are just to say stockier built, bigger heads, and obviously there is the telltale giveaway. If we can see underneath the leopard's tail, that would certainly help. My gut is that this is a male, just looking at the size of the head and the size of the body, but without a point of reference, it's quite difficult to say. But if you really push me, I'd say this is probably a male. Um, but it's quite hard to know until I see some obvious signs. In terms of age, very difficult. Life expectancy for a leopard in the wild, up into the teens, potentially even late teens, obviously longer in captivity. You just sort of have to make an educated guess more than anything else. If we could see the nose, that would help. Young leopards have pink noses, the sort of the pigmentation bit that we just can't see where the nostrils are, and with age that will get darker. I would say generally after sort of 3 or 4 years, the nose would be completely black. Prior to that, it's more pinkish in color. Otherwise, you're looking for sort of cuts and scratches and scrapes and general size and bulk. So it's quite difficult to accurately age a leopard. The best way to do it would be to look at the teeth, but I don't recommend doing that on a wild animal that is healthy. Abel, you want to know some of the myths or misconceptions that I've heard floating around about leopards? Well, of course, there are quite a few. I think the most common one that I've had from guests when they say, "Oh, let's go look for a leopard," is that they're constantly going to be looking in the trees. There seems to be this belief that leopards will always be in trees. Yes, as I'm sure all of you know, they are quite capable of climbing up into trees, and they're a lot more visible when they're in a tree. So they are seen more regularly because they are in a tree. It's easier to see them when in long grass. A lot of people kind of expect that if they're going to see a leopard, it's going to be in a tree. I would say only a very small percentage of the times I've found leopards has been when it has been in a tree. Um, Generally speaking, the only reasons they'll go up into a tree is if they've got food and they are trying to take it away from other predators like lions and hyenas, against whom they would not want to get too involved. But in an area where there are either not big trees or a very low population of other animals, there's no particular reason to expend the energy to drag a carcass up into a tree. Yes, in the sands we did see it quite regularly because there's a very high lion and hyena population there, so it's a good thing for the leopard to get his food up there. But certainly they don't just hang out in trees. Sometimes if it's very, very hot, they will climb into trees to get away from some of the sunlight, enjoy the shade from the foliage, and also, perhaps more importantly, to access the wind, which is stronger higher above the ground. But I think that's the most obvious misconception. To give you an example, my parents have obviously been have come out to visit me on quite a few occasions. They've been on quite a few safaris over the years with me in various different locations, and my mother is still yet to see a leopard in a tree. I've never been able to show her a leopard in a tree. Yes, we've seen them walking around, we've seen them hunting, we've seen leopards with cubs, we've followed them through the undergrowth, but she's never seen one actually in a tree. Okay, well, our people behind the scenes have been trying to see if we can get an identification on this leopard. And there are some suggestions, although nothing positive, that it could be Shidulu or the Ingrid Dam female, which puts what I said about it being a young male to pay. It shows you it's not that easy. So I don't know if anyone else can identify her or him from that. One of the things we're looking at is the spot patterns, just like fingerprints, every spot pattern is unique. The ones that we really look at are the whisker patterns around the face, particularly along the top line of the whiskers, those little black dots. Every one will be unique. It acts like an ID kit. So evidently what I potentially said about being a male was incorrect, but say difficult from this perspective with nothing to relate it to. So possibly Shadulu, or otherwise known as the Ingrid Dan female. Shiv, and I'm glad that we have made your Sunday. Yeah, not often that we get to show you a leopard live at the waterhole. And Kay Russ also commenting on the coloration there, much darker on the top and pale legs. Again, that's often is the case in many animals, paler on the bottom half, to reflect heat. And also it works as a sort of a counter shading thing from a camouflage perspective. So you've got the light of the sun beating down on the animal's back, which will make the darker part look lighter. You've got shadows closer to the ground, which will make the lighter parts look darker. So it gives the animal more of a sort of a solid overall color. It just helps it blend into the environment a little bit better. It's called counter shading. Because they do vary in color. Black leopards, melanistic leopards, have been seen. Have been reports of a few in South Africa, and famous one up in Kenya as well. It's just a case of melanism, so far too much melanin, or not too much, but far more melanin than normal, leading to a very, very dark coloration, but doesn't lose the patterning. The patterning is still there, just far less evident. You get strawberry leopards, which occasionally crop up. I remember one in Madikwe a few years ago, which have a more of a sort of a pinkish hue to them. But it's all to do with different pigmentation. Sandy also loving the colours, yeah. Remember, a lot of that might be to do with the saturation levels of the camera, but I agree, she's got a very, very rich, sort of burnt orange coloration. Very, very pretty. But how special is this? See those massive paws as well, hiding those lethal implements, those claws. It's one of the things a lot of people use the incorrect word for. They often describe all cats' claws as being retractable. Actually, the correct terminology would be protractable as opposed to retractable. It's a little, it's not exactly a fallacy or a myth, but it's something that's often used incorrectly. The term retractable would suggest that the natural position of those claws is out, and then effort is made or muscles are used to retract the claws. But remember, in all cats, of course, claws remain contained until they choose to flex out those claws and protract them. But incredibly strong, razor sharp. And those wrists as well, very specially adapted in leopards for their habit of climbing up into trees, being able to sort of lock their wrists, and hugely agile, but they have that ability to support their body weight when coming down a tree, which is lacked by things like cheetahs or lions. So a lion can climb into a tree. I've seen multiple lions in trees, but they really struggle to get out of a tree because they can't sort of go head first and brace themselves without their wrists breaking. I don't mean sort of snapping, but not being able to take their weight. Look at those really long whiskers. Fairly sure I'm right in saying the longest whiskers of any of the cats. Very important to help understand their environment. Prefer those heavily vegetated riverine areas, um, and important to give the animal information about the vegetation around its head. If they're going to sneak through a little gap, they'll be able to tell with their whiskers if there is space for them to fit. And if you actually see a perfectly head-on photo of a leopard, you'll see that the whiskers, when they are sort of erect and standing directly at 90 degrees from the face, they're actually longer or wider, I should say, than the width of the animal's body. So it almost acts like extra tactile appendages. And at the base of those whiskers, or those vibrissae, the proper name for them, is this little pocket of blood packed full of nerve endings. And anytime those whiskers touch anything, or those whiskers are touched or move, because it's in this sort of pocket of blood, the any movement is translated really water, and that delivers all that information, that sensory information, to the brain. Joanne Miller, you're right. This is an absolute thrill. Yeah, unusual to see a predator moving around during the day, but you can see just relaxing. And I suppose that's another one of those fallacies that predators are only active at night. A lot of it comes down to individual behavioral differences. But I've seen many leopards walking around during the heat of the day. I've watched lions hunting at 12 o'clock in the afternoon on a summer's day when it's 45 degrees outside. I followed a female and a juvenile, I think, for best part of 2 hours because everybody else had gone back. It was after safari time, sort of official safari time had finished. And we followed them from about 10 o'clock until 11. Yeah, midsummer, I think it was January. And they walked right pretty much from one side of the reserve to the other during the heat of the day. So, yes, more active at night or dawn and dusk, but they do move around during the daytime as well. And Hans, yes, the strawberry leopard that we mentioned earlier is referring to the coloration. It's never one that I've seen in person, but a strawberry leopard, instead of having that sort of rich orange color that we can clearly see here, it's more of a pinkish color, hence the term strawberry. But yes, it's still the same species, as is a melanistic leopard. Same way a black panther is just a melanistic jaguar, basically. Well, basically, that's exactly what it is. So different pigmentation, genetic differences, manifesting in slightly different colorations, and those animals are given names, but they are still Panthera pardus, a leopard. Still very alert though, not having a good snooze. You can see head up, constantly looking around, taking in the surroundings, ears twitching. Her attention's been drawn on a couple of occasions. It would be amazing if she does get up. I'd like to actually see more of a profile of her. We get a better look at her face, confirm that ID, um, and say indeed that it is a she. I've been very much persuaded it is a she. It's very difficult to tell just by looking at an animal in isolation from an unusual angle, I might add as well. But to be honest, who cares if it's a boy or a girl? It's a leopard live. Rifling through the memory banks of all the amazing leopard sightings, I've had another one has just popped into my head from when I was in the western sector of the Sabi Sands at one of those sightings that will live with me forever. It was with a leopardess, and she had three young cubs, probably around about 4 months old, I would think, maybe 5 months old at the time. And she had killed an impala, and we were watching her and the cubs feed on this impala. And I was parked next to a marula tree about 20 meters away, the tree that produces the fruits used in the very famous amarula drink. And whilst we were sitting there watching the leopard and her three cubs, we saw a hyena nose down headed towards the area. And I remember having that horrible feeling of, well, something terrible could happen here. We might actually see a leopard cub be killed by a hyena because predators kill other predators. That's natural. And I was sat with this sort of horrible realization that this might happen, and I really wanted to make a noise or clap or do something just to attract the leopard's attention so it would look up and see the potential danger and be able to get the cubs to safety. And there's all these thoughts going through my head very, very quickly that, of course, I didn't want to see this, but I know I'm not there to impact or change anything. We're supposed to be watching natural wild behavior. And I managed to quell this desire as much as I didn't want to. I think, no, we have to let this play out the way nature intended. But a leopard's senses are incredibly honed, and evidently something gave the presence of this hyena away, and the leopardess looked up. Her name was Maquella. I'm going back many, many years now. She looked up where that hyena was probably about 15, 20 meters away. And it was amazing what happened next. She barked an order. The cubs scattered. One went up a tree next to one of my colleagues on the other side of the sighting. One came to the marula tree that I was parked next to and scampered up the trunk of this tree, probably within a meter of my car. This little tiny leopard cub went flying up the marula to safety. I actually got a picture of that cub, which I had printed off and was in my granddad's house on his wall. But the third cub was sort of left stranded, and you could see he kind of didn't know what to do. Mum had also shot up one of the trees, but there was this little stump. It was probably about chest height, so maybe a meter, meter and a half. And this little cub had sort of scampered up this stump and was sort of perched on the top of it. And the hyena walked in, took one look at the impala, looked up, saw the little leopard cub, and obviously decided that that was going to be his first port of call, reached up and just grasped the rump of this poor little leopard cub, but didn't thankfully bite. I think he was just sort of maneuvering the leopard cub to get a better grip to pull him off that stump. And obviously, the second this happened, the little one let out a distress call, and then in a flash, and I mean a fraction of a second, the mother jumped out of the other marula tree opposite where I was parked. She must have been a good 2.5 meters, 3 meters up in the air. She jumped straight out of the tree, pretty much jumped across the bonnet of the other Land Rover, one bounce into the hyena, claws, teeth, snarls, dust, utter chaos. And she managed to sort of chase the hyena away, and that gave the little cub a chance to get down and scramble to safety as well. He did have a flap of skin hanging off his rump, but I'm delighted to say that that cub, the injury did heal. She doted upon the cub, licked it, kept that wound cleaned, and it did heal. Yes, everybody got back to their trees, and the hyena ate the rest of the impala. But that was just incredible to see the speed and that maternal instinct of that mother. It's one of those sightings that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Okay, so they're still quite young. Look at that pink nose. That's what I was saying earlier, that as they get older, that nose becomes darker. Beautiful animal. Look at those eyes. I'm not sure what that was on the screen that we just saw flashing past, but something attracted her attention. Looking at some pictures that somebody sent through of that Shidulu, if it is indeed her. And certainly she also does have a pink nose, trying to discern the spot patterns. What a glorious creature. So I've got a couple of screenshots of that Shidulu or Ingrid Dam female here, and I'm just trying to match the spot patterns to make sure if that is indeed this animal. If I go quiet, it's just because I'm studying pictures and trying to figure it out when she moves her head. I think there's a very good chance it is her. I can't say for sure just yet. I need a screenshot of looking at the camera just now. That's spectacular when she looks up at us. Those beautiful eyes. This is something I've never really found a satisfactory explanation. For example, why a domestic cat has the classic shape of a cat's eye, whereas lions and leopards have circular pupils. It's obviously to do with how much light is being let in, but quite why the domestic cats have that more sort of oval shaped pupil as opposed to this. I'm never 100% sure. I've never read anything that sort of completely satisfied my curiosity over it. It's all to do with how much light is being absorbed and visual acuity, certainly. But that's such a piercing look when she's looked up at the camera. I think there's a few of you um, disputing this sort of the name Shadulu. Remember, I know a lot of you will know Shadulu from Juma. This is definitely not her. This is not in the Sabi Sands. This is at Jabalani, so just outside Hoedspruit. Um, Shadulu is just a name, remember, and actually it's an African name that means termite mound. And a lot of times, leopards in particular seem to be named after the place in which they were first seen. Or maybe they have a preference. They're often found sitting on termite mounds, or they like sitting on termite mounds. And I know of probably two or three different Shadulu from the sands. I've seen Shadulu a few times. She's very sort of white patches above her eyes that I always found quite distinctive. So this is a Shadulu. I think my favorite name for a for a leopard. And remember, the same leopard can have multiple different names. When he goes into a new area and the guides dub a leopard something new. There was one that we used to see at Sabi Sabi days. I believe his original name was the bicycle crossing male because he was first found at one of the river crossings somewhere that was known as Bicycle Crossing. And when he came into our area, he completely messed up the whole leopard dynamics. A new male moving into that territory, and one of the guides I was working with dubbed him Shahungalas, which meant in Shangaan basically sort of translated to the destroyer, because he completely sort of messed with all of our leopard dynamics and the ways, the places we would often see certain leopards and the territories of certain leopards. And I always remember that name, Shihungalas, the destroyer. But I know there's at least two or three Scotia females knocking around as well. Yeah, multiple leopards of the same name and multiple leopards with different names. Okay, Nightingale, it is a lovely pose, classic leopard pose. It's spectacular when she glances up towards the camera. But say enough debate about the name. I'm not quite sure. So whether this is a leopard named Shadulu or whether it is a completely new one, with all due respect, is fairly irrelevant. But it is still a live leopard, and that is incredibly, incredibly special. And they are all beautiful. Thea, in answer to your question, I think she's just very much relaxing. She's certainly not on the hunt. You can see the body language of an animal. If it was on the hunt, it would be slinking low, the sort of shoulder blades almost popping out of the shoulders, or sitting in much more dense cover. This is a leopard that is very much having a rest. See, alert, yes, and opportunistic, like any leopard will be. If the opportunity suddenly arises, we'll see a change in her behavior. I've no idea of what is around her. I don't know this camera particularly well. But if an impala happened to wander in or she saw something, if she was in hunt mode, we would see that behavioral change almost instantly. But remember, there are times when predators are moving around and they are specifically not on the hunt. If they're doing a territorial patrol and scent marking and roaring, they're making themselves very, very obvious. They're walking down established territorial pathways, which are usually roads in areas where there's a lot of human activity. They act as very much um, highways and territorial boundaries. And so there are times you could see a leopard wandering down the road, walking straight towards a herd of impalas. The impalas go ballistic and snort and watch and run away. Well, generally don't run away. They'd like to keep an eye on the potential predator, but no hunting behavior being shown. So she's very much just relaxing. But if the opportunity arises, she will, I have no doubt, have a go. She doesn't look as if she's eaten recently. Not a particularly swollen belly. You can always tell a predator that's eaten recently because they feed on so much meat at once. Their bellies become very, very distended. And if she was to flip over so that we could see the base of her stomach, you'll see that quite a lot of cats, there's sort of loose skin around the stomach there, allowing that belly to fill up with food. They haven't got to worry too much about other things predating upon them. So they get as much protein rich food inside the stomach as possible and then relax and digest. It would be fascinating if something did wander into this equation, though. If we actually got to see a leopard hunt live, that would be unbelievable. Oh, she's off. Yeah, disappearing. Look at that, just bam, gone. Look how good that camouflage is, particularly this time of the year. All the grass is dead, lots and lots of oranges around. Yeah, it just disappears. Well, that was pretty spectacular, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed that. Right, whilst we digest that amazing sighting, let's head back up to Old Donyo in Kenya. Well, zebras seems to have vacated the area. What we need now is a nice coalition of 4 or 5 cheetahs to come down for a drink. That would be nice. Sarah, my wildest leopard sighting. Well, I've told you a couple already. I think another one that springs to mind. It was just probably one of the craziest sightings that I've ever experienced in the western sector of the Sands. We had seen nothing, and I mean literally nothing, not even an impala, for about 2 hours. We heard, then finally heard some impala's alarm calling, tracked down the source of the noise, found the impala, found a leopard, found a second leopard, had mating leopards, which was pretty amazing to watch. And then obviously with all the alarm calls that the impalas were given off, other predators had heard this as well. And a few minutes later, a pack of wild dogs moved into the area. Both the leopards flew up trees. So we had a pack of wild dogs circling trees, harassing 2 leopards up in 2 separate trees. And then again, I assume because of all the commotion, then a pride of lions came in, chased the dogs off. So within the space, having seen nothing for about 2 hours, within the space of probably, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes, we had mating leopards, leopards in trees, dogs, and lions, basically all in the same sighting. And so I always remember that one because it was a perfect example. It's so difficult not to get stressed if you're having a quiet drive because of what I was saying before. It's lovely to be out in nature, but we've got guests usually only for 2 or 3 days. We want to deliver a great experience. They want to see everything they possibly can. And it does, I used to feel the pressure a little bit if we weren't seeing good things, but that was a lovely reminder that absolutely anything can happen at any time. Lovely sights up at Old Onya. A little bit of gentle interaction between these elephant bulls, but certainly when we first went up there, the one on the left who was drinking was completely stationary. Again, it seems to be a great place to come and just have a rest for these elephants. Nice to see that you aren't getting a chance to come in and drink unharassed. You can see some temporal secretions from both of these bulls here, but not full must. I feel slightly less pressure now that we're not looking at a leopard. I think I got myself so confused with names and trying to figure out, is it a he or a she? And do we know this leopard and have we seen this leopard? It's a whole different ball game, isn't it? It actually becomes almost detracts from the sighting itself because we do have a tendency to label these characters as they're often called, and it's nice to be able to follow individuals, but sometimes we get so worried about wondering who it is that we forget to just enjoy the experience for what it is. I mean, I've had people before, because of the popularity of social media and things, certain individual animals have gained notoriety. I think of the Mapocho, the Majingalan lions when I was guiding on a full-time basis. Leopards that have certain names. I mean, some of them even have Facebook and Instagram pages. And occasionally we used to have people who wanted to come and see a specific individual, and you could show them five different lions or five different leopards, but if it wasn't the one that they wanted to see, they would sort of leave disappointed of a shame, really. We should be appreciating all of them for their own beauty. You know, we used to have big debates as to whether we should be naming animals at all. I did that we probably should do because it incited interest from tourists. It enabled us to give a better backstory, which is very, very important. We don't just want the science. People want to hear about personal experiences and the histories of certain animals. But yeah, we just need to be careful sometimes, I feel, not to get too wrapped up in the exploits of an individual as opposed to just enjoying the honor of seeing these animals. I feel this one's just trying to avoid any problems. The one at the back just keeps giving him a little gentle shove. Just keeps on, just trying to have a drink. Definitely an older bull at the back. You can see by just the way the skin's sort of hanging around the face. Fascinating to watch the body language. As soon as that one moved off, this one just again turned his back on him and has no interest in getting involved in anything. This is sort of midday nap time. You can see very, very soft eyes, relaxed posture. It's chill time for these elephants. Beautiful shots of the texture of the skin. And look at those doleful eyes, barely open. You can see that little white build up in front of the eye. That's from the what's called the Harderian gland. They don't have tear ducts like we do, so that's just for lubricating the eye. And every time that nictitating membrane, that third eyelid, sweeps across the eyeball, we'll just take some of that fluid just to lubricate the eye and get rid of any dust. Those beautiful long eyelashes to help protect the eye against the sun and also for their habit of sticking their heads into thorny trees. Yeah, clearly see a little bit of temporal secretion there from those temporal glands, but say certainly not full must. Catherine, you're right. It is nice to get to know these animals individually, but say we just need to be need to be careful not to get too attached to them. They are still wild animals. And it is very difficult. And we've all been in that position. I think myself, and I'm sure the majority of guides as well, have all shed a tear every now and again when something has happened to one of our favorite animals. And it's impossible not to get attached to them, especially when you're spending so much time around them every day and you feel that you really are a part of their lives. You become so invested. It's very much it's an emotional experience, and so one of the things that I count myself incredibly fortunate to have experienced to watch cubs grow up and mature and go off and start their own lives and hold their own territories and have the opportunity to have their own breeding rights. It is very, very special to be a part of, but as I said, we must remember that they're all doing their own thing. And so, don't get me wrong, I don't begrudge the naming of it. I just encourage everyone to respect and appreciate all of the animals. Dr, you're asking a question that many people have asked, and I'm afraid I don't have a um, an acceptable answer, to be honest. Why we only really ever see the bulls at Oldonio and not the breeding herds? The simple answer is I don't know. Breeding herds do have a habit of moving sort of further afield. Bulls can also traverse over massive distances, but if they've got access to everything they need, then why bother going too far? Um, but yeah, I think we're saying that we've only ever seen one female at Old Donyo, which is amazing. You'd think laws of averages would suggest otherwise, but for whatever reason, it seems that the females don't frequent this area so much. It was suggested by somebody a little while ago, is it because there are so many bulls in this area that the breeding herds don't come through because they are intimidated and they don't want the grief? It's a possibility, but I don't know. But I agree. Ooh, look at this one's got a tusk facing the wrong way and a massive slash out of his ear. I don't have a concise answer for you, I'm afraid. It would be very interesting to know. Get more and more bulls coming down, older bulls, younger bulls, but no sign of any breeding herds. This one's gone straight into the middle. I wonder if it's the same one as yesterday, who also took up residence in the centre and then kept chasing away those poor warthogs who wanted to come down for a drink. Of course, yesterday we also saw that elephant with that was completely lacking in a tail as well. Respectful touches going on there. Catherine, you're suggesting that maybe the waterhole's not big enough for a big breeding herd of elephants, and that there would be too much competition, and maybe there are bigger, more convenient waterholes, possibly. But there again, I mean, I've seen elephants looking out of tiny little dams, and they'll just sort of queue up and take their opportunities. So it's possible, but I don't know if that's necessarily the reason. There must be a reason, be it availability of resources or food or yeah, other areas of water or a protective instinct to for the youngsters. It's an interesting conundrum, one that yeah, I don't know. If anyone else got any suggestions, by all means, do send them in. But regrettably, we're almost out of time. It's flown by today, but what an amazing afternoon at the waterholes it has been. Obviously, the highlight has been the leopard. Lovely to see that sort of scrabble of zebras as they were jostling for around the waterhole here at Old Onyo. But what an absolute treat to see a live leopard. My first on live at the waterhole, and we were graced by her presence, particularly when she's looking up at the camera there. We've got such beautiful, beautiful views of those eyes and whiskers and those markings. So special, and I love the way that she just casually got up and melted off into the bush. But thanks so much for joining us, everybody, and for your questions. I'll try and get back to you on stuff about animal pain and Ilons tomorrow. Don't forget to stay tuned for the rest of the afternoon's shows, including the sunset safaris. But I'll see you tomorrow at 12:30 for more waterhole fun.
Well, a very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on our highlights show this afternoon. It's a beautiful Sunday, and the sun is shining, and not many clouds around. And we are coming directly from a Juma Private Game Reserve in the world-renowned Northern Sabi Sands. My name is Cedric, and behind the camera with me, we've got Bertus. So, yes, in the next half an hour, I'm going to be discussing exactly what we've been seeing in the last 24